Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast.
Yeah,
Woohoo!
woohoo!
This is episode number
82.
82. Thank you, Justin. We are joined with Leon Revel
Hello, everyone.
and Justin Ribeiro.
Hello, wonderful people.
And I'm Eric Isaacson, starting at my new position here at Carfax.
Woohoo!
So, very excited. I get to use some web components, get to use some React, get to do some cool stuff.
I love that the fox is behind you. I mean, I feel like
amazing.
that fox is like, yes, I'm on this podcast right now.
I put him there to keep me company. No, I had to like jump in a room like most places here. You know, when you have to book a room, right? But I totally didn't book a room, so I'm like squatting.
So you're just in a closet somewhere. People
Pretty
are
much,
like,
pretty
why is
much.
the new guy in the closet talking to his computer? Because,
Yeah.
him and the fox
why-
having a conversation.
I prepped for that conversation by actually telling my boss where I was going, so I don't think I'll get fired for this.
Yes, that should be that should be always number one. For you young podcasters out there, don't get fired while podcasting.
No. So today we're going to be talking about web components as usual. We talk about it quite a lot on the podcast.
It's a very popular topic.
Yeah, I mean, this is my first time back for a while. I was working pretty hard on some client work, and I was getting to use some web components actually. And here at Carfax, we're building out some vanilla ones that we're putting on GitHub. At least I'm putting it on my own GitHub, and then if we decide to migrate it over, which we wanted to do another episode with the browser vendors and talk about that, and I think we'll be able to table that since they're pretty busy right now.
A little bit busy.
Yeah, especially Google's prepping with I/O, and we have Firefox has a whole bunch of other tickets that they're working on. So until people have calmed down a little with their stuff outside of work, when I/O's over, and maybe during the fall or something, we can get everybody back together. Because that was a good episode. I think it was 54, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's been a while back now, and a lot's sort
Yeah.
of progressed since we started talking about our web components ready. Things have been updated and changed and whatnot.
Yeah. There's been a lot of work, especially on the custom elements, but the Shadow DOM I see updated almost daily as far as the wiki goes and all that stuff on GitHub.io. So
Yeah, there's been a lot of movement. I mean, I think that the Shadow DOM was a very contentious bit. I think most developers and folks can agree about it. I mean, swords weren't drawn and we weren't dueling at dawn, but at the end of the day,
No.
things needed to change on Shadow. And I know that some people love it and some people still not so thrilled about it. But there has been some agreement. And we'll put it in the show notes, but if you take a look at the wiki, a lot of the contentious bits have been worked out, and people are actually working on them in terms of the browser vendors. So we're getting a lot more sort of smoothed out on that side. And then custom elements exploded this month.
yeah, WebKit and Chrome, right?
Yep, 2 tickets opened up this month where they're working on the version 1 spec, which there was another meeting that occurred. Been a lot of face-to-face meetings, which are great when the browser vendors get together. And I think people have this notion that they don't want to talk to each other as competition, but it's been pretty clear that they're all fairly discussing a number of specifications at this point. And custom elements has got a lot of movement lately. They worked out a lot of the contentious bits. Everything from your attribute change sort of things for creation, constructor call versus create callback. These were previous contentious bits. A lot of those things. Yeah, is equals.
Yeah, I saw
So-
that on there.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's been a lot of contentious bits, but now with tickets open, people are starting to work on them. They're assigned tickets, which are good because, as we all know, tickets don't necessarily mean they're being worked, but they do have assignments. Justin, who works over at Polymer and whatnot, he's got a pull request out sitting for the polyfill at the moment on webcomponents.js. So custom elements has gotten a lot of movement, and we've seen a lot of that sort of coming to fruition out of a lot of those face-to-face to just resolve problems that the web is having.
You can tell the friendliness too from the notes. Like if you look at the contentious bits, right? There's some pieces in there that refer to like you're like there's normal stuff like, oh, here's the contentious bits, life cycle hooks, and then there's one section here I was like, what? Where it's like what is it? It's like Dimitriisms or something in there.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, Dmitry Gleskov and Alex Russell are kind of considered the godfathers of web components. And so when you're going through this, like I'm looking at this on GitHub with custom elements, contentious bits, that document now. I mean, there's stuff, constructor Dmitry proposal.
Yeah.
Like you can tell that it's like friendly banter between everybody, regardless of where you're working at, which is really awesome.
Yeah, I think the people who work on the web really do love the web. I think that's where there is, where you may have a different opinion of sort of where things want to go or land, but at the end of the day, things actually do get done. Which for a long time wasn't the case. I mean, I think we can all remember when it wasn't. But these days, in terms of,
we'd be using HTC files now, right?
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't. I wouldn't be using HTC. No.
I mean, I did a pair programming session with Leon. Maybe it was in January or something.
Yeah,
we were working
out since then.
Yeah, and we were working out like, all right, well, if we were going to do just vanilla type components, what is it that we really need that would work for most of our applications? And so we were looking at like Angular and the template if type of stuff that Polymer had or has, so that what do we need? So we did the template repeater, which was a Rebel repeater, which is on Leon's GitHub, and I thought it was a really good. I learned a lot because we used ES6 and trying to load these modules in. Did you want to talk about the process of kind of going through vanilla stuff today? Like how are we using it today? Because I learned a lot from that pair session.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting. I mean, the ng repeater from Angular, obviously, it's one of the first things you kind of use when you learn the Angular framework, and it's kind of amazing when you first, you just give it some data and off it goes and draws everything out for you and those kind of things. So that's kind of why I thought it'd be a good bit of functionality to try and reproduce just using vanilla JavaScript, not using Polymer or anything else, and just seeing how difficult or easy it would be. So that's kind of why I gave that a go, and just looking at some of the, very few best practices that had come about from my own experiences and looking at other things that people have been doing online, and obviously ES6 or ES 2015 it's now called was kind of the best way to go, and just looking at the standard way of writing those and just seeing how quick it was to actually build out the thing, and it turned out really well, and it was a great experiment just to see kind of what's already available in web components in comparison to some of these other frameworks. So it was like you said, a good experience writing it.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out some of that with the distribution. Like if I pull in something like template or Rebel repeater in that case, right? If I pulled that into my application, I have Webpack, right? I'm going to use Webpack to try and load that in with the current configuration. So I'm having some errors pop up. It's kind of like a growing pain for me, trying to figure out, well, how can I do this since it's not supported yet? But it's like I think it's so much better than doing like Bower install and things like that to use those module loaders. And so I wasn't sure if we even needed HTML imports at that point. I do see the value in them, but I'm seeing more value in the modules right now.
Yeah, certainly the way I've been building things recently is not using HTML imports by any means. So literally writing entire applications in ES 2015 with modules, etc., and then using Webpack to bundle everything up and then just distribute the application as the transpiled ES5 code. And just just importing the modules and the components and classes and stuff where needed, and that seems to work quite nicely. I suppose it gets quite difficult if you're trying to work on an application that's mostly written in ES5 already and finding a way of kind of transpiling and then including those in when you're starting afresh and you've got just an ES 2015 project, I think it'll be a lot easier. I think a lot of this stuff's still really been worked out yet, so I suppose it'd be interesting to see if how other people are doing things.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we're sort of in that interesting portion of it where we know some things work. We don't quite have best practices yet for all of them. And we want best practices because we all really want to use the cool new stuff that makes things
so much
easier
to work with, like the classes and using the imports. Totally.
Yeah, and I think that's, we have to work on those things a little bit. So I think we're going to make some missteps as we sort of guide our way into, the world of ES 2015 and ES6 as more things sort of land. Obviously, there have been some road bumps, as they say, but alas.
Well, for future proofing too. I mean, I've had this conversation with Leon before too. It's like I love Polymer. I love what it provides for me, but I do want to make sure that in the future I can just use if once React and Angular and Polymer are gone, because things change. We have new frameworks come up and new libraries, and I want to make sure that these components are simple enough that if I wanted to use them, I could just include them.
Well, and I think like the Polymer folks understand a lot of that to some extent. I mean, if you look at the 2016 roadmap, you see that they want those modular, smaller units of maybe I just want data binding, or maybe I just want this, where you're not relying on the stack. But at the end of the day,
they're really well-designed components for sure. Like,
sure.
If you look at Polymer elements and you go through the tests, even like I went through Iron Ajax tests because I had to do some Ajax type stuff in a component, and the sign-on tests with stubbing out the server and stuff was very, very eye-opening on how that component worked.
It is the nice thing about, I think, a lot of the web components that are being written right now. Like, there are some very, very good ones that really give you a gauge of sort of what the gold standard, not even necessarily from like just a custom element, like what you should be doing whenever you're building whatever element you're building for any platform. Like, I think we get a long way away sometimes because, obviously when you're in a production environment and you have deadlines and you might have an entire QA team behind you, maybe you don't write so good tests. You write I got like 25-30% coverage, I'm feeling pretty good about things right now, which doesn't give a lot, that's not exactly like a full vote of confidence across the board. So I think there is that sort of gap, but there are some really great sort of elements sort of being built out. With the APIs solidifying now too. Do you need to use the libraries as add packs? As basically standard libs? Maybe not. A lot of the stuff I build on Polymer right now doesn't use any of the actual Polymer elements themselves. They're just using Polymer, the library itself, because I want certain features in Polymer. Which, again, that's just my personal preference. It's the way I've been writing some components for broad things, and it works out pretty well. But everyone has to make that decision for themselves.
The nice thing about Polymer and the other frameworks like this is obviously you've got some reliance. You know that they've written it well, it's going to work well, and they've maybe masked some of the issues that you might have if you're trying to do it with just vanilla JavaScript. And obviously the standard itself's been kind of in the air for quite a while, and like you said, now it's solidifying a little bit more. Hopefully, I'd personally really like to see more people writing vanilla web components just because of the true interoperable capabilities of them. I think that vanilla web components can solve a very big problem in the open source JavaScript community, which is the churn effect, which is we just throw out tons and tons of stuff all the time, which is amazing. But the problem is frameworks have a short lifespan. So if you write something for a specific framework, but that component, whatever it is that you've written, is amazing, and you then want to either use it in another project which uses a different stack, or you need to upgrade your offering, your product, and then you've got to potentially rewrite that particular component mostly to work with a new set of technologies. But if we have a standard such as web components that transcends the different frameworks, I think it can solve a lot of problems. And I think it'd be really cool to see what kind of comes out of this at the end.
Yeah, there's a few things that stand out to me about Polymer. Is the Polymer community, first of all, is just so great. Like, everyone's excited about it, and everybody's collaborating together. And I feel like with the vanilla stuff, it's not there yet.
No,
right?
not at all.
And the other thing too is, like you said, that it's just so battle hardened for production now.
Yeah.
And like with the Polymer starter kit that some of the GDEs are working on, and it's just, there's so much stuff that we can utilize from there. So I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't build Polymer stuff at all, because I plan on building Polymer here if I can. but like, I want to get into the experimentation of it to see what is really truly viable now, what works now, and not say, well, I'm just going to use Polymer because it's Polymer, right?
Sure.
I want to try this out and see what works.
No, it's a good point. Like, I think that the kicker is that we should be kicking the wheels, right? Like, even as the specs solidify, things get built. Obviously we've got tickets open for V1 for custom elements, and I think that'll be a huge deal when those things start to land. In terms of because once, between the life cycle and everything else, and trying to figure out, basically getting rid of sort of the non-deterministic way that currently works in terms of V0, which realistically is only in Chrome right now. I think that then we'll see more vanilla sort of start to come out, and as the tooling gets better too, because I think that's the other problem, right? We were just talking about tooling, and one thing you need is that if your tooling sucks and you want to write in that way, right? They have to mesh, and then you get into the integration story, and then that's where things really start to take off.
Yeah, definitely.
I think examples as well, because obviously there's an absolute huge wealth of Polymer components out there that are really written well, lots of documentation and stuff, but there's very few vanilla components yet, obviously because the community isn't that big yet, so that'd be really nice to see, more examples like the repeater or simple things like that kind of really show how easy it is to actually build these things. That would be really great to see as well.
My go-to still right now for vanilla components, if I want to see what people are building, is still CustomElements.io, Zeno's project, which is amazing, right? But it's also too, like, I notice a lot of people don't put documentation or demos or testing, and that's okay because we want more stuff out there. But it's hard to really look at that and be like, oh, well, can I use this? How much time am I going to devote to try and fix this? And I'm guilty of it myself. Like, I just released a component, and I put it as an NPM package because I want to use imports and Babel to load it in, so I don't necessarily need Bower, right? And that is probably not going to be tracked on Custom Elements right now, because I think the way that it works is it goes through your package JSON and looks for web components, but I think it has to be a Bower package. That's my understanding.
Or package.json, I think so.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one it does. I could probably just go check, but yeah, even on there, it's hard to really see what's the standard way to do this. And Polymer team has done a great job at saying, this is how you document stuff. This is the way we're documenting stuff. This is how you do a demo. This is how we're doing a demo. This is how you test. Oh, by the way, we have this highly maintained tool called Web Component Tester that you can just use. Oh, and if you want to build your own, here's Hydrolysis or whatever, which is the core of this thing. So it's like, it's amazing the sheer amount of work that people have done for the community. We can even use that stuff for vanilla web components.
Yeah, sure.
Like we can't. The one thing though that bugs me. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
You can just smack me.
No, hey, you're the boss of this thing. I'm just here drinking my coffee, enjoying the conversation.
I left. I have no right to just jump in and smack you.
You never left, as far as I'm concerned.
But we have the CSS problem, and Leon and I have struggled with this for sure. Like, you can use Webpack to load in SCSS files, but one thing I found with this last component I built was if I didn't include Shadow DOM, the only way I'm going to get encapsulated styles is to use style tags. there's no other way, because I'm like, without a Shadow DOM, all of those components are getting the same updates visually, and so I was really frustrated with that part of that. And Polymer has a great like polyfill type of feature, which uses the same syntax as CSS variables and does the same thing, shims it basically. So we're using what is going to be used in the future, which is great. The thing that I would really love to see, though, is that to be broken out into its own module that could be used elsewhere as well.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, no, I think that's... Well, we had this conversation, I think, or at least you and I, maybe we had this conversation.
Oh, we definitely had this conversation.
We probably had this conversation about Shady DOM as its own sort of thing. Like, what if you just wanted to use Shady to shim out and didn't want to use anything else? And I think that, I think that's a reasonable approach for some, right? It depends on what you want it to do. And right now, again, we're in that sort of, it's kind of hard still. Like, with Polymer, it's fairly easy because everything sort of works. With webcomponents.js, you can, conditionally load it, and flip the bit, so you can use Shadow DOM, which is basically the way I keep telling people to do it. But requires testing, as Rob and I were talking about the other day, because with Firefox, I think it's behind a flag right now.
I always run into errors on Travis or something, though.
Yeah.
It always happens on the CI. There's something that's getting like it's. So I'm really trying to learn the configuration details. That's hard for me at least, because I don't understand it yet. But yeah,
configuration's always a pain, right? Web components are not like my CI broke today. Shocker! Like, what did I do wrong? Or maybe does that only happen to me? Because if that only happens to me,
passes on my local.
You're like, Justin, you're a horrible developer. What is wrong with you? Stop breaking the CI.
I'll test it in Firefox on my machine, and then it gets tested over there on Travis, and I don't know what happens, but it breaks. So
I think the whole styling with web components is quite an interesting conversation as well, because it adds like a whole new level of UI design. So typically, if you're at like a jQuery plugin or whatever, you'd build your thing. It'll have some default styles that you'll think will probably work on their website, Grays or whatever. And then that they could easily just write some CSS which overrides it, and they've got exactly the thing that they want. But of course, with the idea of the Shadow DOM, and you can encapsulate all this functionality, you've then got to start thinking about what parts of your component you're going to allow them to override and how they do that. And there's a lot more design involved in the actual creation of these elements and things as well. So I think, again, it's figuring out exactly how this should be done and all those other kind of things. So that's going to be interesting to see kind of what people start doing to solve these kind of problems.
Well, and I think that goes to the fact that you have atoms and molecules, right? Like, you sort of need to have an understanding of where your component starts sort of in the chain. Because I did a web component last month, I guess, now. It was just a real-time hook form. Like, that's all it did. Like, it was a form, it had some paper elements in it. It was just this little contact form, and it was designed to work with this Slack bot thing so that it would ping Slack when you fed through this loop. And it's not an atom by any means, right? It's a molecule of a thing. Like, it is that thing, not you're going to go and style this later, because that's definitely not the way it was built. And I think there is some problem with that in terms of the way people start to think about how to build components. Like, are you building a component that you're going to use in prod? Or are you building an atom that somebody's going to use that has more functionality and more API that allows you to do those sorts of things? And there is a big, huge difference between the two, and they have very different sort of implementation approaches. Where you're more implementer or more the designer of that thing. And when we talk about theming, I think that's the one thing that comes across a lot is, well, how do I theme it? And you look at some of the components that are getting built, and they're like, well, I don't have any theming options in it because I built it for this one specific thing, this my use case. And that's absolutely fine. You may do that to your heart's content. But as a reusable component, it may not be so reusable in the wide open world of open source.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even just changing your general site theme from red to blue, and then you realize, oh, hang on a second, I've now got to go into the source of this one component, which is designed for that specific thing, because red and blue look silly or whatever. It's interesting where you wouldn't have that problem with standard jQuery plugins or Angular directives or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, I think, we're gonna have to take, as people building components, you do have to take you have to step back, and I think you have to look at the larger picture. Like, if I'm gonna open source this, is it gonna be useful enough, like, for a wider audience? And you look at sort of like Vaadin and basic web components and Bosonic and like those things, right? They're little building blocks to bigger pieces, and then you have like Vaadin, who's got charting and everything else, which is really specific. So again, there's places for all these things, but as a developer, you're going to have to decide what works best for what you're trying to reach in terms of an audience or whomever that you want to use it. And then being able to discover those things also is kind of a nightmare right now, which I know CustomElements.io does much better these days, right? Discoverability, yay!
Yeah. I think it's great though, like that we have these things now, where we can discover these things quicker. And I think people are more open to discussions of using web components than they were. Like when I started after, it was like 2013, after I saw Eric Bidelman's talk at I/O, right? And I was like, oh my god, I need to do this. And I've been obsessed ever since. It's like, it's a horrible obsession, but a wonderful obsession.
Well, they just become so useful, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's where people get obsessed with sort of or at least that was where my obsession was that it was compartmentalized APIs. My little API landscape of a thing, and you get the DOM on top, right? So you use the same methods that you would normally use, your query selectors and whatnot. And that to me was a powerful feature. But I'd also lurked around the list, seeing it. I remember these popping up on the list because I lurk around on many mailing lists and I say nothing because no one wants to hear me ramble. I mean, it's amazing people are listening to us right now. But the reality is that for a long time it didn't look like it was going to happen, right? It took for a long, long time, and
we've tried a few times in the browser to do this.
Yeah, and this is true. If you go back even further, right? There were the early concept of them, but now here we are, and now it's just really addicting.
Yeah, I mean, if you have an element that once you load it, it functions like a standard HTML. And I see a lot of people, when they try to build components, and their first component is this giant monstrosity, which is not a bad thing, right? Because I think a lot of my early ones were definitely large, but it's so big that it's only going to serve that one purpose. So it depends, like you said. You have these things like Vaadin charts, really great. They're huge, right? They got all these powerful tools, but you're going to use it for specific things, right? Mm-hmm. It loads its own dependencies, which is on the gold standard, right? So that was one thing that annoyed me when I'd go to a component, not even web components, just any component, and then you say, okay, load these 3 libraries and install this, and then with npm, and you'll be good. Like it should load everything that it needs for itself. You should have like something ready for it if it's not there.
You're exactly right. Otherwise, people won't use them, right? Because at the end of the day, when we start to have tools that allow, like even with Bower or whatever, I'm installing something. If you're not telling me that it's a dependency and you're dealing with this, then it's problematic. Like you're making life significantly harder for all those involved.
There's a barrier to actually using those things if they've got to then go ahead and do all this other configuration. Even if it's just installing a few other libraries or whatever, it's still something extra they have to do, and another reason for them not to use it. So having that managed for them is so much better.
And you still have in the components, even the large components that have all these different small pieces, like a framework where it's building on like you said, atoms and molecules. I think that's great, but it's not the only way. So
exactly,
because otherwise you're ultimately, when you do that, you're creating dependencies that you're going to need to pull in, right? So you could say, I want everything inside this component, and it can be this giant app inside of there, and that's okay. We used to say, oh my God, no, don't do that in web components, but I'm starting to think that if you have a specific purpose for that, and that's fine. You can have that. You don't have to build the basic ones.
Well, the server. I mean, we're in a weird spot too, right? Because now with H2 or HTTP2, for those who like the longer variation, at the end of the day, that we can ship faster, right? You can pull a whole bunch of things down on the line in terms of dependencies and the way those things work. So, does that mean that we should, send the kitchen sink? No, because obviously connections vary across a wide range of platforms and devices, and we should be smart about that as web developers. Please don't use the "my bandwidth is fine" argument. I hate that argument with a passion. That's great that you're on fiber. The rest of the world is not.
Well, that's because you work with mobile more than a lot of developers who are looking at web components only work desktop.
True.
And so it's like I think it's a little odd, but it is a true thing. It's not people. The mobile last is a lot of what's out there.
Yeah, definitely. If you look at some of the corporate sort of things, that or at least I work on, we don't care about mobile. But that doesn't mean that the kicker is at the end of the day, where are your users coming from, right?
Yeah.
You need to have an understanding of what your story is and who's actually going to use that thing, because a lot of people don't know when they're starting to develop things. They have assumptions, but assumptions generally aren't necessarily the best thing in the entire world. But in terms of smaller units, I think that's the beauty of web components. You can build them however you want based on your particular use case, which is why there's so much power and why they're so addicting.
And why there's so much competition between different developers and different, all the different browser vendors think differently about how these things should be implemented and how they're going to be used in their browser.
Yeah, the mobile side of things is quite interesting as well, because obviously you said about not sending the kitchen sink, but if you've got a mobile device, there's lots of times where you're going to be offline. So if you're efficiently loading dependencies as and when required in the application, but they're under a tunnel for a particular amount of time, you're not going to be able to do that. So you're going to have everything kind of ready to go up front, and that's quite an interesting thing to consider as well. I mean, obviously most people use mobile devices for everything nowadays. There's a lot of people that common users, non-heavy computing users tend to use mobile devices and don't bother with laptops even anymore. So, I'm a mobile architect. Mobile is what I do all day, every day, even with web components and stuff. So I'm slightly biased on that kind of subject, but it's very interesting. I think the way we're going to handle these different environments. But even moving off from mobile onto fridges and all the other Internet of Things and stuff, when they have some kind of UI side of stuff, that'd be quite interesting as well.
Yeah, and again, I think with progressive web apps, which I know we're going to have an episode on later, but you look at Service Worker and the things that have sort of happened with that, and you can pre-cache now, right? And you can use H2 push in some scenarios to push down that initial asset packed where based on that first ping that's going to happen, which is fantastic. To be honest with you, I've been using it in prod for a couple things. It's amazing. The perf you get is awesome.
I really wish we could as even here in the United States with the bandwidth that we have, that just so we take it for granted. Like when we have bad bandwidth, it's actually really good for some places.
Sure, right. I mean, you look at you look at the bandwidth in India, for instance. They had a whole talk about that in terms of the Flipkart thing, which they just released some statistics, I think, this morning, as a matter of fact, on sort of how that app looks. And while that's not I don't know that they used direct web components in that, but they did use Service Worker, and they showed huge gains in terms of the things that were going on where people use Flipkart in terms of bandwidth, how they interact, more interaction. Because at the end of the day, if you can sort of get that telemetry and that data, you have a bigger case for the thing that you did, and it seems to have worked rather well for them.
Yeah, I think once HTTP2 is pretty much like, hey, well, this is the way we're doing things. That's going to be great, but I don't see it happening soon. Like, I think it's happening, but I don't see it happening for the whole world soon, because even corporations, like, you have to upgrade TLS, and then you update TLS to get to HTTPS, and we're not in a place now where the whole web is HTTPS, and until we're there, I don't think places are even going to consider HTTP2, unfortunately.
Well, I think right now it's, what, 16, 17% of the top 500, top 1,000 sites are using H2 TLS at the very minimum now. I think that's what that stat is. I will probably be wrong, and then I'll go pull it, and it'll be something better.
We need to keep pushing the envelope. Don't get me wrong.
Oh no, well, if you're not using TLS, if your site is not secured out right now, please do. Like, just a PSA for the day. Please secure your site and your assets from man-in-the-middle attacks at the very basic level that you can. I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking you to do pinning. Look, I know pinning's pain. We all know. But we should probably do an episode on that too. Yes, I think we will. Let's put that on the list. Justin rambles about security.
Well, I mean, the things that we have to do to sprite things and to concatenate all the things and minify all the things, like HTTP2 fixes a lot of that. That we won't need to do all that, and it speeds up. The latency is much better. The bandwidth's better. Everything gets better with that, but it's one of those things that right now it's like, let's keep pushing because it needs to move faster, but it's still going to be slow.
Sure,
getting there.
Yeah, you're always going to have the, which part of the curve are we on right now? I'm hoping we're on the upward slope. Adoption's been pretty good. If you look at things that have happened sort of in the H2 land lately. There's lots of Let's Encrypt certs are being issued now.
Yeah.
I think.
But those run out at 90 days, right? Or is it 30 days?
Yeah, I mean, you need to rotate them out, which is, I think, fine. There's a lot of infrastructure behind those sorts of things that are happening now, so it's a fairly automated process to do, which is awesome.
So people might be saying, why do I care about this if this is a Web Components episode?
Because at the end of the day, when you start to deal with dependencies, it's all about how quickly can I get my dependencies to that person. And I think if you take one thing away from this conversation, why are they talking about that? This makes no sense to me. Eventually, someone's going to want to actually use your application or your web component somewhere, and you need to get it to them. And the faster you do that, the better experience they're going to have.
Because right now, it is, we do have great tools, mostly made by the Google Polymer team, that will concatenate all these things together into one large file, which can be crazy on mobile. Sometimes you'll get delays that you may think Polymer's not that great, but it's the fact that you have like 50 billion dependencies in there, and so you're waiting for everything to load. These things can't load until the page loads, and then all web components are done. The loading that event happens or whatever, and then. So people blame the framework, I guess is my point, but we have these hacks that help us, and I think we won't need those hacks anymore.
Yes, I think so. And I think people should understand their dependency stack. Because if you're not looking to say, oh, wow, I'm trying to ship a meg worth of stuff down. And this is true for any framework, too. Like, if you're, oh, hey, I'm using the dev build with full debugging on. In my production environment, not the thing you probably want to do, right? Like, I don't care if it's Polymer or React or Ember or whatever. Like, don't do that.
I'd be interested to see, if you have, all those top sites, like where their audience is, like where are they distributing to, what devices are they on? Because you could have, I think Android is better than iOS, but I mean, if you go global. iOS, I would imagine, I don't know this for a fact, I would imagine that it's mostly in US, UK, and maybe some other areas where, where most of the majority of the traffic would be for that.
Well, I think, I know there was some contentious chit-chat the other day on the Twitters about, people leaving iOS to go to Android because the web experience is better, right? We have progressive web apps. With Chrome, you still can't ship, your own engine on iOS, which is kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
Global-wise, I think market share-wise, Android still has, a fairly commanding lead. But again, you're right? It depends on where your audience is, which is why the word progressive is in progressive web apps, because your web app should not break just because you want to use the newest stuff on those devices that don't support Service Worker or the component spec or whatever. Like, you do have to take that approach. And if you're doing it correctly, this shouldn't be a problem. I mean, you have to plan a little bit more, I think, like with any other specification requirement. But at the end of the day, like, it can be done.
Yeah.
You know, how well you want to do that and how much time you have and whether your manager or management would let you, that is up to you.
Yeah, I remember when I got my first iPhone and I found out that I'm just running WebKit inside of Chrome. I was like, man, this stinks, right? But you know what, though? I look at the work that, and I'm totally going to butcher his name, but Ryusin? Oh my god, I'm sorry.
You're asking me how to pronounce names? Have you seen me mispronounce names in like the last 6 episodes?
So, hold on, I'll tell you.
People still let me. It's amazing you let me still run these sometimes when you're not here. Seriously.
So he's a Ryosuke Niwa. It's r.niwa on Twitter. So it's Ryosuke Niwa. All right. So I butchered your name, and I am so sorry. But the work that he's doing on WebKit now, that's exciting. Like I feel like Apple understands, and WebKit in general understands, like, especially him. Props to him, because he's doing a lot of the work for web components on there. And he's been pushing out custom elements, working on that, and they were originally, I think WebKit was the first ones to implement it all, and then they pulled it out.
Yep.
So I mean, they're doing good work. So hopefully, even though we are restricted by Apple, I think there is a lot of progress.
iOS devices tend to have a bit of an advantage over the Android devices, because the Android devices typically go for a more cores, but lower clock speeds. But obviously, until web workers came around, JavaScript's always been single core, so you don't get as a good experience because it's running on a single core, which is a lower clock rate. Where on iOS, they have fewer cores, but the clock rate's a lot higher.
About it is that, I keep hashtagging on Twitter PWA 2016 because I don't care about elections, but I do care about the web. So where it's 2016, this is the year. Progressive web apps, it's gonna be a thing.
Vote web apps.
Yes, go web apps, because we all use them already, and to your point too, I think that WebKit is making a lot of progress on that side in terms of specs and things that are happening, which means that hopefully eventually this year we're going to get more of these features onto iOS, which, again, you can't ignore it. Like, I don't think I'm not one to ignore any platform. I know a lot of people go, I only develop for X, but it's the web, right? Like, to your point, Leon, right? Eventually it's going to be on your refrigerator, and I'm going to want it to run on my refrigerator. Like, I don't know what it's going to do, but
just my opinion on this, but like Android devices, right? To do the Android software, to write the SDK and everything, man, that seems so much harder than doing anything for iOS, because you have so many different hardware targets, right? So like, how do you even think of that at that low level at that OS?
I think it sort of depends on your approach. I mean, I've written for Android and iOS, so I mean, again, with any platform, you can write horrible, unperforming code. I think at the end of the day,
I mean at the lower level though, at the actual like the API, SDK, Google.
Well, I think that a lot of that's been simplified on Android, in my opinion.
Nice.
In terms of things like recycler view and stuff like that, and and like if you want to port your C++ or your C in with the NDK, you can, and then from a Linux kernel side, you can get a lot of perf out of it. But again, you have to understand what the target is, and I think a lot of people go, well, am I gonna go all the way back into the 2X series? Which I would say is probably not very realistic at this point.
I'm so glad you say 1X. It's like it wasn't that long ago. You could go into in the United States at least, you could go into a drugstore or CVS or something, and they'd have phones there, and you just pick one up, and it's like Android 1 point whatever, and you're like, oh, God.
Yeah, these days, I mean, even most of your prepaid stuff, luckily, is at least in the 4X sort of land, which means you can run Crosswalk if you're really building sort of cross-platformy
That's great.
sort of things, which Crosswalk's pretty cool. I dig Crosswalk. So, it sort of depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but as far as I'm concerned, it all runs the web, and that makes me pretty happy.
The web makes me happy too. So what else did we miss on this? What else do we need to talk about with web components? I mean, there's been a few different projects I've seen. Like GE Digital has a project. Did you want to talk about that, Justin?
GE Digital's been working on dashboard components for a little while, and I think they're going to come on the show and chit-chat about that this year.
I hope so.
We hope so. If you're out there listening, wonderful GE people, we would love to have you on. There are a lot of sort of corporate sort of things going on internally with.
Yeah.
Primarily because a lot of people see value in components, because a lot of corporations have built components in the past for other platforms, because that's the simplest sort of approach to getting things where they need to be quickly across many teams. So I think web components fit very well in with a lot of corporate sort of development stories where you're saying, well, here, core component team, build these components so that I can get reporting across the board from whatever division and or team I'm in, make them reusable, because the reusable portion of it is very powerful. And then that opens up an entire land of, sort of outside entities, sort of like the Salesforce folks, right? They have a set of web components. Even Google has their Google Web Components stuff, which is primarily just service stuff, from like Google Sign-In to, Maps. So again, it's a powerful feature, right? You import and put in your tag, and you're good to go. So I think that is a powerful sort of statement to say, oh, it does work well beyond just, me writing super bold, which I think was the first one I wrote, because I'm like, you know what? I'm going to write be the most super bold and awesome web component thing that there is, because everything needs to be bolder. Probably not, no.
I want to see that component. Show me that component.
I will dig it out. I also did one originally that just, it was a cat injector. Like I think someone else did the exact same thing. They wrote a cat injector. It would just inject cats randomly. You just put cat tags in your.
That's it. We need to stop making components now. We've finally found the one that matters. We don't need to make any more. We'll just use that for everything.
That one. I love it. My first one, I think, was all I did was I took the image for what do you call it, Pair With Me, like those little badges for Pair With Me. I just made a quick badge component, right? And like it does nothing, but I was like, I need to practice with this and play with this.
I thought I was gonna actually make one legitimately the other day, a canary in the coal mine one for the you've got a secret NSA letter. The canary left your web component. You just put it on your page, for yet more random security facts.
We should do more stuff like that. Have fun with it, right?
Yeah. Web development is supposed to be fun. Or at least I think it should be. If you're not having fun, please have fun.
No, some people would disagree and say, no, it's supposed to ship.
Wow. Shipping is also fun.
Seeing that sort of stuff ship is more fun. All right. So there's also, I think Riot.js does some web components in there. They have like a React type of setup too, but I'm not sure. I still have to look into them, but I'd like to get them on the show.
I think we have a lot of good shows coming up.
Sounds like it.
And we need to talk about Angular too some more and see where React is. We haven't done a React episode in a long time.
This is true. So if you're out there listening to this podcast right this very moment, you're saying, I can talk about these things, please reach out. We're always taking new callers.
All right. So is that it pretty much? Do we want to talk some more about some stuff? Or is that...
I think we're running up against time at this point.
Yeah. Bumping up there. Because I slowed us down. I jumped in later. All right.
I don't think you slowed us down. Leon, did we miss anything? We've probably missed a lot. You're like, you guys are off the rails.
Well, the thing is, there's so many cool things you can talk about with web components. We just need to split them up into thousands of more episodes.
Yeah. I agree with you.
You mentioned about talking about the different frameworks and things. Well, it'd be quite interesting to maybe have an episode about how these new and upcoming frameworks like Angular 2 and React, etc., are going to support components in themselves. Because I hear a lot of talk about this, about how you can use native components in these different frameworks. That would be quite interesting.
We might be able to get somebody from Aurelia, because we had Rob last time, like last year. It's been almost a year, I think, now.
It has
I forget what episode it was, but Rob Eisenberg from the Aurelia project, he was on, and we had, I think it's a Daniel, I think. But he was on Read the Source, this other person who works on the project. We might be able to find out who might be good through him.
Yeah.
So yeah, good idea. I think it's great. We need to revisit it because I think once the changes are in, I think we're going to see more integrations with Angular 2 especially and Aurelia. Because Rob is on top of he's so on top of all the spec stuff. Like,
yeah.
I remember when Object.Observe was done, I pinged him. I'm like, hey, do you want to be on this episode? He's like, no, I have a whole bunch more work to do because of this thing that just happened today. And I'm like, and it was like totally. It wasn't mean or anything. But he's that dedicated. He's so dedicated to that project.
Cool.
Then we shall have more episodes about integration. Because integration is going to be, it's every web developer knows, it's a lot of integration amongst many different things.
All right, guys.
Take us home, Mr. Eric.
Yeah, it's been so long. It's been episode 82 of the Web Platform Podcast. If you want to find more about web components, you can check out actually Leon at RevelWeb has a great blog on some of this stuff and some examples. If you're looking for vanilla web components, you can check that out. Also, episode number 80, I think it was, with basic web components.
Yes.
Is a great one if you guys want to learn more about web components. And thank you so much, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Goodbye.